Hello again, it's Josh here down at Get Real Audio with part 4 of my basic home recording series, and today we're going to have a look at rooms and acoustics. I'll unravel this in 2 parts. Later on we'll have a look at how to improve the acoustics of the room that you're working in, but first of all let's have a look at how to choose the room in the first place. There are 3 simple things that will help you work out which of the rooms you have available will be best for making a recording in. So the first one is that big, soft, heavy things are really good at absorbing long reverb tails. So if you have a really lively room, placing sofa, mattress, heavy drapes, curtains, that kind of thing into them, I'm talking like velvet curtains or ones made out of like a wool serge fabric, that kind of thing, can be really helpful, as can thick carpets and heavy rugs. The second factor is that nearby hard surfaces, so we're talking hard floors and also ceilings and walls, will reflect sound back to the microphone. So you want to be as far away from those as you possibly can be. And the third factor is that irregular shapes on the walls, so I'm talking about things like bookshelves or items hung on the wall, instruments or even pots and pans or anything like that, will diffuse a longer reverb tail, making it much smoother. So all of these 3 points tend to steer you away from the traditional location of the home recording studio, that tiny shoebox of a third bedroom, into something more like a living space or a bedroom, somewhere where there are sofas or mattresses and things all over the walls. Hopefully now you should be able to identify which room in your house is the best one to record in. And now we're going to have a look at how to improve that room beyond how it sounds already. In order to deal with the problem thoroughly, we need to understand a bit more about how it all works. So I already explained that the general ambience, reverb tail of the room can be tamed pretty effectively with soft furnishings, but that longer part of the reverb tail isn't really the biggest problem. It's fairly quiet when you compare it to the early reflections. When you make a sound, the first thing the microphone hears is the direct signal, which follows the shortest route between the source and the microphone. A few milliseconds later, a version of your sound which has bounced off the nearest surface will be heard by the microphone, and that's multiplied by the number of surfaces you have. So you might have a hard floor, which might be the closest surface, followed by the ceiling and then the walls. Without getting too technical, the addition of those extra versions of your sound bouncing off a wall or a ceiling or a floor will have the effect of slightly thinning the character of the sound at the microphone, which might make it sound more brittle or, less full. The closer the surfaces are, the louder and sooner this reflection will be, and the more exaggerated the thinning effect. So that's a really good reason to use a larger room. So just after those first order reflections are what's called the early reflections, which may have had to reflect off an additional surface before it arrives at a microphone. These last a little bit longer, but they're also a little bit quieter. It's easy to see straight away that by placing some sort of absorbent barrier between the instrument and the microphone and those reflection points, you could tame those effects quite easily. But it might be better to understand a bit more about how the microphone picks up sound and from which directions before we just randomly start placing soft things around. The shape of a microphone's pickup response is called its polar pattern. Polar patterns range from omnidirectional on the one hand, listening all the way around the microphone, through more directional sounds, and then they start to increase listening on the rear side of the microphone, and the very, very far end of the scale is bidirectional, otherwise known as figure of 8. In the middle of that range is the one that we're going to be focusing on, is called the cardioid pattern. Here's a diagram to help you visualize how it picks things up. A cardioid microphone is much more sensitive directly in front of it, but it will still pick up quite a bit of sound from the sides. But at the very back, it won't pick up any sound at all. But this diagram is only half the story. Cardioid microphones pick up different frequencies with slightly different patterns. So the lower frequencies tend to be picked up more omnidirectionally, so more all the way around the microphone. Whereas the higher up the frequency range you go, I'm talking about S's and pick sounds, tend to only be picked up from the very front of the microphone. So around the sides, you're going to get more of the warm sounds and less of the brightness. And in the very front, you'll get the bright sounds. So now that we've seen that, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to place any absorbent materials between the back of the microphone and the wall that we're facing. The problem is all going to happen around where we are. So the best place I can think of to place absorbent materials would be either side of me, here and here, between me and the microphone, or around the rear either side of me as well, because the microphone is looking directly at the wall behind me and may well be picking up reflections that have bounced around the room and are coming from that direction. Every home will have the materials you need to solve these problems. I just had a quick look around the studio here. I found some movers blankets. I've put 2 on here, but more would be better. And I've hung them over a wire clothes area. And I found a bigger clothes area, and I've put this snazzy rectangular AT sleeping bag over it. And both of which are doing a great job at dulling the reflections where my guitar would be. Obviously, if I was singing, then these wouldn't have as much effect. So that would need dealing with in a slightly different way. So what you could do if you needed to have a higher level absorbent surface is to grab a duvet and maybe get some microphone stands, and you'd have to lash them together in some sort of solid way. And you could hang it over that, or just improvise. If you have a hard floor, then experiment. You may well find that having some of those reflections off like a shiny laminate floor might help the sound of some stringed instruments. Some reflections are good. Having all of them from all directions can sound confusing and can sound a little thin. But every now and again I find the brightness of one reflection can be quite nice. Of course, one reflection that's harder to deal with is the ceiling. In my room here, I've got a smattering of these really cheap foam acoustic tiles. I think they're about £5 each or something. It might be that you don't want to stick things to your living room ceiling, and that's understandable. So that could well be your single reflection that's going to help brighten the sound a little bit. Lastly, in this episode, I wanted to talk about these sorts of devices. This is a thing called the reflection filter made by SE Electronics, and tons of companies are making these now. I think this is one of the first. The idea with this product is that you place a microphone, let's say this, inside the scope of this shape. Now, whilst you're thinking, okay, well, given what Josh has just told me, the back of the microphone doesn't hear anything. Well, as you can see, this one envelops the microphone around the sides as well. It can work wonders, and it can certainly be a problem solver if you have a really reverberant room. But I find that even in these absorbent surfaces inside here, there is a small amount of reflections in the lower frequencies internally. And I don't like the sound of it. I think it makes the vocal sound too stifled somehow. So I very rarely use this. The only time I do use it is if I want some increased separation between a microphone and an instrumentalist that isn't playing into that microphone, so in a band setup. So just to recap, look for the biggest room you got, with the most soft furnishings in it, stuff all over the walls. Make some rudimentary acoustic treatment out of clothes areas and blankets and duvets. Learn how your microphone picks up sound. Job's a good one. Thanks for watching these videos so far. In the next video, we could go in a bunch of different directions. So 2 ideas I've had is we could look at using 2 microphones at the same time. So that could be to record something in stereo, or to record 2 different people, or a voice and a guitar. Or we could have a look at some software tips and tricks, mostly to do with capturing and editing. As ever, please share these videos if you like them, and comment away, ask me questions. I'll see you next time.